A country of 2.8 million people cut its national debt in half over 10 years, not through rapid economic growth, not through currency devaluation, not through a debt restructuring that punished foreign creditors, through sustained fiscal discipline, maintained across two governments from opposing political parties, through a global pandemic, through back-to-back hurricanes, and through a crime crisis that had placed the country on international risk watch lists for years. That fiscal achievement is documented in a peer-reviewed paper published by Brookings in the spring of 2024, co-authored by economists from the IMF, UC Berkeley and Stanford. They called it the Jamaica Exception. Of all the emerging markets and developing economies with available data going back to the year 2000, exactly 5 countries had reduced their debt-to-GDP ratio by 40 or more percentage points in a 5-year window. Jamaica was the only one that did it primarily through budget surpluses rather than through growth or restructuring. The debt story is the foundation. On top of it, Jamaica has built a tourism industry generating $4.3 billion annually, a logistics infrastructure designed to compete with Rotterdam and Dubai, a security transformation that reduced murders by 43% in a single year, and a financial compliance architecture that resulted in the country being removed from the global financial crime watch list in 2024. Understanding how those pieces connect and how they were stress-tested by the worst natural disaster in Jamaica's recorded history in October of 2025 is the subject of this video. In 2012, Jamaica's debt-to-GDP ratio stood at 144%. That figure placed Jamaica among the most indebted countries on Earth relative to the size of its economy. The country had been through 16 consecutive IMF programs since independence in 1962, and nearly every one of them had gone off track. The pattern was consistent. Jamaica would agree to reforms, implement them for a period, and then abandon them when the political cost became too high. The 2013 program was different in its design. The government entered a $932 million extended fund facility with the IMF, but alongside that agreement, it did something that had no precedent in Jamaican fiscal history. The government, the political opposition, labor unions, and employer associations all signed a document called the Partnership for Jamaica Agreement. It was a formal, multi-party commitment, not a policy announcement, acknowledging that the debt was unsustainable and that the burden of resolving it would be shared across political and economic institutions, regardless of which party held government. To enforce the agreement, the government established the Economic Policy Oversight Committee, staffed by senior figures from the private financial sector. The committee reported publicly every quarter on whether the government was meeting its fiscal targets. Deviations were named and explained, not quietly revised. The arrangement made it structurally difficult for any finance minister to adjust targets without public accountability. The fiscal plan required Jamaica to maintain a primary budget surplus of 7% of GDP annually for 6 consecutive years. That is a level of fiscal restraint that most governments in most countries never achieve for a single year. Jamaica maintained it for 6 years running. When the Jamaica Labour Party replaced the People's National Party in government in 2016, the program continued without interruption. The primary surplus held. Barry Eichengreen of UC Berkeley described Jamaica's achievement in a 2024 Brookings podcast as unique among countries that had attempted comparable debt reduction. In his assessment, other governments could theoretically adopt the same framework: fiscal rules, cross-party consensus, independent oversight. But replicating the result required the specific institutional history Jamaica had built across several decades. The consensus machinery that made the 2013 agreement credible was not constructed overnight. By 2023, Jamaica's debt-to-GDP ratio had fallen to 72%, roughly half the 2012 peak. In January of 2025, the country formalized the next stage of its fiscal governance by activating the Independent Fiscal Commission, a permanent non-partisan body protected by statute with a 7-year term for its director, whose role is to independently assess and publicly validate or challenge the government's fiscal decisions. The commission cannot be dissolved by an incoming government. That protection is written into the law. The Jamaica Tourist Board announced in January of 2025 that the island's tourism sector had generated $4.3 billion in revenue during 2024, with 4.3 million visitors, both figures representing all-time records. The 2023 figures were themselves records: 4.1 million arrivals, a 25.5% increase over 2022. For comparison, in 2019, the pre-pandemic baseline, Jamaica generated $3.64 billion from tourism. By 2024, that figure had grown by nearly 20% above the pre-pandemic peak, following a 65% collapse in 2020 when COVID-19 effectively shut down the sector. The Jamaica Tourist Board's stated strategic target, formalized in a plan called 5x5x5 and launched in 2020, was to reach 5 million visitors and $5 billion in annual earnings by the end of 2025. As of January 2025, the board described their target as on track. Airlines increased available seats to Jamaica by 12.9% in the first months of 2025 compared to the same period in 2024. The World Travel Awards, in 2024, named Jamaica world's leading cruise destination and world's leading family destination, and the world's leading family destination. For the fifth year in a row, the Jamaica Tourist Board was recognized as the Caribbean's leading tourist board for the 17th consecutive year. In May of 2025, the United States State Department downgraded its travel advisory for Jamaica from Level 3, Reconsider Travel, to Level 2, Exercise Increased Caution. The advisory noted that violent crime in tourist areas was lower than in other parts of the country, and that crime overall had decreased since 2024. Tourism currently contributes between 21 and 30% of Jamaica's GDP, depending on how indirect contributions are measured. That concentration is a structural vulnerability that the COVID-19 experience made explicit. The sector's performance in 2025, including its disruption by Hurricane Melissa in the fourth quarter, is covered in detail later in this account. In 2024, remittances to Jamaica totaled approximately $3.6 billion, the largest single source of foreign exchange in the Jamaican economy, larger than tourism earnings on that measure. The United States accounted for $2.34 billion of that total. The United Kingdom and Canada account for most of the remainder. 90% of all inflows originate from those three countries, reflecting the geographic distribution of the Jamaican diaspora. The Caribbean Policy Research Institute estimated that the diaspora's aggregate contribution to Jamaica's economy, combining remittances, tourism spending, direct investment, philanthropy, and export demand, represents approximately 28% of national output annually, or roughly $4 billion. The same analysis identified at minimum an additional 11% of GDP in unrealized diaspora investment potential, largely withheld due to concerns about the security environment and institutional quality. In 2025, despite the economic disruption caused by Hurricane Melissa in the fourth quarter, remittance inflows reached $3.49 billion, a record annual total, up 3.8% from 2024. The pattern during the hurricane months was instructive. October and November saw year-over-year declines as disruption hit informal transfer networks. December reversed that. Net inflows rose 13.6% compared to December 2024, driven by diaspora communities sending emergency support to relatives affected by the storm. The Bank of Jamaica reported the December increase was the largest monthly jump recorded during the year. One financial risk to the remittance channel is currently unresolved. United States House Republicans proposed a 5% excise tax on remittance transfers made by non-U.S. citizens, including green card holders and non-immigrant and visa holders. If passed, the measure would apply directly to the channel through which $2.34 billion flowed to Jamaica in 2024. Jamaica's government, financial institutions, and the Jamaica Gleaner have described the proposal as a direct threat to household incomes across the country. As of early 2026, the legislation had not passed. In his end-of-year review on December 25, 2025, Jamaica's Commissioner of Police, Dr. Maker, Kevin Blake, reported that as of December 20th, Jamaica had recorded 649 murders for the year. That represented 487 fewer murders than the same period in 2024, a 43% reduction year-on-year. Commissioner Blake's characterization was direct. This is not a marginal improvement, it is a substantial reduction. The trend line over the preceding years shows sustained directional movement. Jamaica recorded 1,498 murders in 2022, averaging 4.1 per day. In 2023, that figure fell to 1,393, 3.8 per day. In 2024, it fell further to approximately 1,139, a 19% reduction. The 2025 figure of 649 as of December 20th represented the steepest single-year drop in the sequence. Alongside the murder reduction, shootings declined 32% in 2025 compared to 2024. Reported rapes declined 27%. Serious and violent crimes overall declined 22%. 16 of Jamaica's 19 police divisions recorded murder reductions during the year. The operational basis for these results, as described by the Commissioner, included intelligence-led targeting of gang networks, sustained anti-gang operations. Over 2,750 were conducted in 2024 alone, and enhanced firearms interdiction. 667 illegal firearms were removed from Jamaica's streets in 2024, 383 of them seized directly from suspects. Jamaica's homicide rate, even at its current lower level, remains among the higher per capita rates in the hemisphere. The U.S. State Department's September 2025 Investment Climate Statement explicitly noted the improvement, while also acknowledging that crime remains a material constraint on investment. The security gains are real and documented. They are also incomplete, and communities in low-income urban areas have not uniformly experienced the same reduction as areas with heavier law enforcement presence. At its plenary session in Singapore on June 28, 2024, the Financial Action Task Force formally removed Jamaica from its grey list, the list of jurisdictions under increased monitoring for strategic deficiencies in anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing frameworks. Jamaica had been placed on the list in February of 2020 following a mutual evaluation that identified gaps in its AML and CFT regime. Removal required completing a 13-point action plan. By January of 2024, Jamaica was compliant with 37 of FATF's 40 recommendations, up from 17 in 2017. The FATF statement noted that Jamaica had strengthened the effectiveness of its AML/CFT regime to meet the commitments in its action plan. The practical consequence of grey list status is increased friction in international financial transactions. Correspondent banks, the institutions that facilitate cross-border payments and trade finance, are required to apply enhanced due diligence to transactions involving grey-listed jurisdictions. This increases the cost and complexity of international transfers, which affects everything from export financing to diaspora remittances to foreign direct investment processing. Removal from the list reduces that friction across all those channels. Jamaica assumed the chairmanship of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force in December of 2024. Jamaica's national investment policy identifies the country's strategic ambition as becoming the fourth node in the global logistics network, alongside Rotterdam, Dubai, and Singapore. The basis for that ambition is geographic. Jamaica sits at the intersection of east-west and north-south shipping lanes in the Caribbean basin, approximately 10 minutes by road from Kingston Harbor, described by the Port Authority of Jamaica as the seventh largest natural harbor in the world. The expansion of the Panama Canal, completed in 2016, increased the size of vessels transiting between the Atlantic and Pacific from approximately 5,000 TEUs to over 12,000 TEUs. Larger vessels require deeper berths and higher capacity transshipment facilities. Jamaica positioned itself ahead of that shift. In 2015, the government signed a 30-year concession agreement with Kingston Freeport Terminal Limited, a company operating under CMA-CGM, one of the world's largest container shipping companies, to operate the Kingston Container Terminal. The deal was accompanied by $130 million in dredging investment to accommodate post-Panamax vessels. The terminal's current annual capacity is 3.4 million TEUs. Kingston Freeport Terminal CEO Carlos Cabrera confirmed in early 2026 that the terminal connects to 165 ports worldwide, with weekly sailings to North and South America, Europe and Asia. Adjacent to the port infrastructure, Jamaica's business process outsourcing sector employs over 50,000 people on the island, providing the skilled workforce base on which logistics expansion depends. In April of 2025, Prime Minister Andrew Holness announced the groundbreaking of the Kingston Gateway Complex, a 112,000 square foot warehousing and logistics development near the port of Kingston. The Caymanas Special Economic Zone, a 10,000-acre planned development linking the port, Norman Manley International Airport, and the Highway 2000 corridor, broke ground shortly afterward. Jamaica's accumulated FDI stock reached $18.86 billion by the end of 2024, equivalent to 94% of GDP. UNCTAD's World Investment Report for 2025 ranked Jamaica as the largest recipient of foreign direct investment among small island developing states on that measure. Companies operating within Jamaica's Special Economic Zone framework benefit from a 12.5% corporate income tax rate, customs duty relief, employment tax credits, and promotional tax credits on research and development expenditure. Hurricane Melissa made landfall in Jamaica on October 28, 2025, as a Category 5 storm with sustained winds exceeding 252 miles per hour. The World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank conducted a global rapid damage estimation assessment and reported physical damage of $8.8 billion, equivalent to 41% of Jamaica's 2024 GDP. That assessment covered residential buildings, which accounted for 41% of damage, infrastructure at 33%, non-residential buildings at 21%, and the agriculture sector at 5%. It did not include broader economic losses, which the assessment noted were expected to be more significant. The UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, working with the Planning Institute of Jamaica, subsequently produced a full damage and loss assessment, placing total losses at $1.952 trillion Jamaican dollars, described by PIOJ Director General Dr. Wayne Henry as more than 4 times the damage caused by Hurricane Gilbert, previously the costliest hurricane in Jamaica's history. 626,000 people were directly affected. More than 45 lives were lost. 120,000 buildings, the majority in southwestern Jamaica, sustained roof loss. Approximately 450 schools, close to 2/3 of all educational institutions nationwide, reported significant damage, including roof loss, structural failure, or other impairment. Western parishes lost electricity for weeks. Tourism ceased. Sandals resorts and Hyatt both suspended operations. The economy was projected by PIOJ to contract between 11% and 13% in the October to December quarter. Prior to the storm, the full-year growth projection for fiscal year 2025 to 26 had been 2.2%. The revised projection following impact was a contraction of 1.4%, reflecting recovery progress in the aftermath. Jamaica's response drew on a layered disaster risk financing system assembled over the preceding decade in partnership with the World Bank and other multilateral institutions. Within days of landfall, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, a regional risk pool, paid out $70.8 million on Jamaica's cyclone policy, the largest single payout in the facility's history. A second payout of $21.1 million followed for rainfall damage. Jamaica's $150 million catastrophe bond, arranged through the World Bank Treasury and renewed in 2024, was confirmed for full payout, with funds disbursed on December 1st. A pre-arranged catastrophe deferred drawdown option with the Inter-American Development Bank provided access to up to $84 million. Total immediate liquidity available through these instruments came to approximately $1.5 billion, as announced by Prime Minister Holness in the days after landfall. On December 1st, 2025, five international financial institutions, CAWAF, the Caribbean Development Bank, the IDB Group, the IMF, and the World Bank jointly announced a coordinated financing package of up to $6.7 billion over 3 years to support Jamaica's recovery and reconstruction. The package comprised approximately $3.6 billion in sovereign financing from the five institutions and an estimated $2.4 billion in private investment mobilized through IDB, Invest, IFC, and the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. The Independent Fiscal Commission assessed the hurricane's fiscal impact at 5.3% of GDP over the 2025 to 2029 period and formally validated that this exceeded the threshold for activating the escape clause in Jamaica's fiscal responsibility framework. The 60% debt to GDP target, previously set for 2026, was revised to 2028. None of the major credit rating agencies downgraded Jamaica's sovereign bonds in response to the storm, the fiscal impact, or the suspension of the fiscal rules. The World Bank described Jamaica's disaster risk financing framework in a December 2025 assessment as one of the most advanced globally among small island developing states. Jamaica's global cultural footprint operates at a scale that has no direct precedent among nations of comparable size. Two areas, music and athletics, are measurable enough to document with specificity. On November 29, 2018, UNESCO inscribed reggae music on its representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity at the 13th session of the Intergovernmental Committee for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, held in Mauritius. All 23 members of the committee expressed support for Jamaica's nomination, an outcome the Jamaican delegation and observers described as exceptional. UNESCO characterized reggae as at once cerebral, socio-political, sensual and spiritual, and noted its contribution to international discourse on issues of injustice, resistance, love and humanity. Reggae was the second Jamaican cultural element inscribed on the list, following the maroon heritage of Moortown in 2008. Since the Grammy Awards established a Best Reggae Album category in 1985, Jamaican artists have won 34 of 37 times. In 2020, Coffee became the youngest recipient and the first female artist to win in the category. Reggae's influence extends well beyond the genre itself. Its rhythmic and harmonic structures contributed to the development of punk rock, hip-hop, drum and bass, dubstep, grime and reggaeton. Sound system culture, which originated in Kingston in the 1950s, is widely credited as the precursor to modern DJ culture globally. Marcus Garvey, born in St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica, in 1887, founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, and developed a body of political philosophy centered on black self-determination and Pan-African solidarity. His influence on 20th century civil rights movements, including figures such as Malcolm X and Nelson Mandela, is documented in the scholarly record. In track and field, Jamaica's performance relative to its population size is statistically anomalous by any standard measure. Usain Bolt set the 100-meter world record at 9.58 seconds in Berlin in 2009. He set the 200-meter world record at 19.19 seconds at the same championships. He won 8 Olympic gold medals across 3 games and 11 world championship titles. Shelley Ann Fraser-Price is a multiple Olympic gold medalist in the women's 100 meters. Elaine Thompson-Hera won gold in both the 100 and 200 meters at 2 consecutive Olympic Games. Azafar Powell held the 100-meter world record before Bolt. Malaine Otai competed in 7 consecutive Olympic Games between 1980 and 2004. Jamaica has accumulated over 80 Olympic medals since its first Games appearance in 1948, with the substantial majority coming from track and field events. A peer-reviewed academic study published in 2024 in the Journal of Sports Analytics, authored by Andrew Perez and Robert C. Duncan of the University of Texas, applied a population-adjusted probability ranking to Summer Olympic results. Under that methodology, Jamaica ranked 3rd at the Tokyo Games, 8th at Rio, and 10th at London, placements typically occupied by nations with populations between 60 and 300 million. The central question in assessing Jamaica's trajectory to 2030 is not whether a transformation has occurred. The fiscal data, the tourism revenue figures, the crime statistics, the FATF status, and the FDI stock levels all confirm a substantive directional shift across multiple economic and institutional dimensions simultaneously. The relevant questions are about durability and risk concentration. On risk concentration, tourism's contribution of 21 to 30% of GDP represents a meaningful vulnerability to external shocks, as both the COVID-19 pandemic and Hurricane Melissa demonstrated. The logistics and BPO strategy is explicitly designed to diversify that base, but the diversification is in progress and incomplete. Jamaica's homicide rate, though declining at a pace that has drawn significant international attention, remains among the higher per capita rates in the hemisphere, and the gains are uneven across communities and parishes. The proposed U.S. remittance tax, if enacted, would affect the country's largest single source of foreign exchange. The informal economy, estimated at 31% of all economic activity by World Economics, represents structural fragility that neither fiscal rules nor FDI stock fully address. On durability, the institutional architecture Jamaica has built since 2013, the fiscal rules, the Partnership for Jamaica Agreement, the Economic Policy Oversight Committee, the Independent Fiscal Commission, the multi-layered disaster financing system, the FATF compliance framework, was stress-tested simultaneously by a Category 5 hurricane that caused damage equivalent to 41% of GDP. The credit rating held. The fiscal framework activated its designed escape clause, validated independently, and committed to resumption. The international reconstruction package arrived within weeks. The murder rate, despite the economic disruption of the storm period, continued its downward trajectory. Jamaica in 2013 was a country with 144% debt to GDP, no fiscal credibility, a deteriorating security environment, and a 16-program IMF track record of reform failure. By early 2026, it holds an accumulated FDI stock larger than any small island developing state, a UNESCO Cultural Heritage designation, world records in the fastest events in global athletics, $6.7 billion in committed reconstruction financing, and a murder rate at a generational low point. The description of Jamaica as a future superpower is not a claim about military capacity or GDP ranking. It is a claim about the disproportionate weight a nation of 2.8 million people carries in economics, culture, sport, and international institutional credibility relative to its size, and about whether the reforms, infrastructure, and financing now in place will produce sustained growth through 2030 and beyond. On the available evidence, Jamaica has already demonstrated an institutional capacity that most countries with 10 times its population have not. The reconstruction capital is committed, the debt trajectory is documented, the logistics investment is active. Whether those inputs produce the growth that the government's projections anticipate is a question the next 4 years will answer.